and Animal Welfare Committee to order. Mr. Bonin and myself present, we have a quorum, and I'm going to ask that we continue items 5, 9, 12, and 16 until our next meeting. And if we could begin our public comment period, and people will have 1 minute for each item for up to 2 minutes, plus 1 minute of general public comment if they so desire.
Caller with the last four numbers 8769, please select *6 to unmute yourself and state your name on the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, this is Diana Mendoza from PETA. I'm sorry, did you say that you're continuing item 16 about the mobile clinic contract?
Yes, we are.
Okay, that was my item that I was going to speak on. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Caller with the last four numbers 1108, please press *6 to unmute yourself and state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Hi, everyone. Daniel Gus. All of the Department of Animal Services items and general public comment. I understand that some of the animal services issues have been postponed, so I'll be as brief as I can. Council members, I am concerned that we have a number of very valuable donations regarding our trust funds to help animals here. As you know, late last year, I expressed great concern that $1.5 million that was donated to the Animal Welfare Trust Fund was, in my opinion, very dubiously squandered on a very squirrely organization called The Glue that doesn't have a background in building websites, that doesn't have a background in fundraising of any substantial degree, and I'm concerned that $1.5 million was used for purposes that don't bring direct comfort and care and feeding and healing and grooming to the animals in the city's custody. Now we have these other donations, and I'm wondering if these funds may be misused, as I define misused, in the same way that $1.5 million was misused. On that note, I will switch to my general public comments and I'll get out of your way. I have been trying to get a copy of the proposal that the Glue submitted to the city of LA to get that $1.5 million contract. Animal Services tells me we don't have any other records other than what's out there. But that is not a proper legal response to a public records request saying we don't have anything other than what's out there. Other than what's out there does not respond to a public records request. And I would once again ask the Pause Committee to have Animal Services send me a copy of the proposal that got the Glue its $1.5 million contract. Where is it? Where is... I used to write proposals for KPMG. I wrote government proposals for Arthur Anderson. How can the city of Los Angeles not know where the proposal was that gave away $1.5 million, especially a controversial one? Please find out and have Animal Services, if you don't have it yourself, council members, send me that proposal. I just want to see what they promised the city to get this massive contract when they don't have any apparent employees, they don't have an apparent physical address. Who are these people and how did they win this money? Thank you so much. I'll listen to the rest of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Caller with the last four numbers 6940, please press *6 to unmute yourself and state your name and then the items you wish to speak on.
Good afternoon. My name is Ruth Perry. I'm the president for the Retired Los Angeles City Employees Incorporated. I'd like to speak on item number 8, Council File 20-1606. On behalf of the almost 7,000 retired members of our organization, our LACI is strongly opposed to any significant changes to the retiree health care benefits provided by LACers. Following is our rationale in opposing any significant benefit changes. Pursuant to LACER's most recent actuarial evaluation, its retiree health benefits are exceptionally well funded at 85.6%. This funding level is virtually unparalleled in any jurisdiction in the country. LACERS already works diligently every year to help ensure the possible pricing for the health care plans it makes available to its retired members. These annual efforts include, but are not limited to, considering whether to go out to bid on the contracts and actually going out to bid every time it is deemed to be prudent, requiring its healthcare providers to give LACERS and its consultants voluminous data, which is not member identified, regarding the usage its members make or do not make of the plans. In conjunction with its healthcare consultant, LACERS makes use of that data to help keep its rates low and to help ensure its members are using the benefits appropriately. Through this process, LACERS has been able to keep healthcare increases well below the actuarially assumed increases. In addition, LACERS has also uses the data from the healthcare providers to provide areas of focus for LACERS Well program. Through this program, LACERS keeps its retirees live, healthy retirements, including incentivizing specific preventive health care. LACERS was the first public institution to make such data-driven use of its retiree health program. Especially during a global pandemic, this is a terrible time to be discussing health care reductions and or increased co-pays, deductibles, or other costs for the women and men who served the city well during their careers. Some of our oldest and most vulnerable retirees are the ones who can least afford such changes and are the ones that provider and doctor changes would most adversely impact. Therefore, our LACI requests that the committee not support this motion as written and instead congratulate LACERS on a job well done for many years in managing retiree health care costs. Thank you.
Thank you. And one thing I forgot to mention at the beginning of the meeting, we also have a special meeting which will take place no earlier than 2:30.
Goodbye.
And if anyone wants to speak to items on that special meeting agenda, they'll have to call back in at that time. Mr. Hirsch, do we have a next caller?
Did we get hung up? Should I recall him? One moment, Councilman, we're having some technical issues. That thing just disappeared. Okay, let's try it again.
How serious are our technical issues?
Reconnecting the Zoom meeting. Hold on, I need to consult here.
And I'll note for the record that our colleague Marquise Harris-Dawson has joined us. So welcome to you both as new members, Mr. Bonin as a brand new member and Mr. Harris-Dawson as a returning member to our slightly reconfigured committee.
D followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed. You are in the meeting now. There are 5 participants. You have been muted by the meeting host and cannot unmute yourself. You are unmuted.
So are we able to resume public comment, or are we still having technical difficulties?
Technical difficulties.
I think the city clerk is trying to speak, but I can't hear his voice.
You should be able to do it now. Everything's been reconnected.
Mr. Hurst, do you want to try again?
Yes. Hold on. Caller with the last four numbers 1403, please press star 6 to unmute yourself, state your name and the items you wish to speak on.
Update. Can I be heard on all items in the general public comment period for pigs?
Go ahead, your time's running.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Peppa Pig. Today, you are doing a very good job. Yes. When you do a good job, the Peppa Pig is the very first to say so. He was taught that by the late John Walsh. Rest his soul. Now we have angry pension holders. They don't want a health care cut. Went from Encino, my driver, he got his health care cut. So now, the city employee will also have to have their own health care. Yay! It is so fun not to have government-paid health care. You pay as you go. When you get a cut, you go to the hospital and you tell him, bill it to call correct 213-473-7005. Just kidding. So again, we have this budget problem. It's now called personnel,
Audits.
and animal welfare. Remember, Paul Peppa Pig is running for controller, so he will budget you into the ground. Yes, now we have a proposed contract with Acclamation Management Services. What is this?
I have no fucking idea.
Neither do I. We will pass on number 9. Number 10, HHH, bitch. Terrible job there. Number 13, you are trying to sterilize my brothers and sisters from populating the earth with 2 pigs. No, if pigs cannot breed, how will Mr. Harris Dawson get this sausage?
I think you're off the item. Could you return to the items, please, or start your public comment?
Yes, I will start my public comment, you fat fuck. Yes, I think so. So now, we want Marchese to apologize to the great Lynn Moses. You tried to get TRO against him, just like stupid ass in 2016 did. When you do TRO and fail, you get the FBI. FBI will convict you of crimes when you get fake TROs. When you get fake TROs.
Sir, your time is up. Thank you very much.
Yes, the FBI is looking for...
Caller with the last four numbers 5542, please press star 6 to unmute yourself. Say your name and the item number you wish to speak on.
Calcedillo for mayor! Cal is not
Mr. Spindler, you've already spoken. Thank you very much.
Gil! Number one! Gil! Gil! Number one!
Is there any reason why this line isn't cut off? He's already spoken. He was the previous speaker under a different voice.
He just cut off. He was just cut off. That's it for public comment, sir.
So we will close general public comment, and I will ask that we take items 1, 2, 3, 6, 8, 13, 14, and 15 on consent without objection. If not, we'll do a roll call on those items.
Very good. Are you ready?
Yes.
Councilmember Koretz?
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonin?
Yes.
Goodbye.
Very good.
Thank you. Those items are passed unanimously. We could hear item number 4.
Item 4, motion Koretz Buscaino relative to the provision of disability retirement benefits for 83 public safety officer positions under the Los Angeles City Employee Retirement System Public Safety Tier 1 Enhanced Benefits Provision.
Hello, sir. This is Dana Brown from the CAO's office to report on this item.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, sir. Aside from LAPD sworn police officers and LAFD sworn firefighters, the City of Los Angeles has other peace officers providing public safety services to the City of Los Angeles. These groups include the sworn members of Los Angeles World Airports, as well as the Harbor, and also the municipal police officers at LAPD, and finally the park rangers. So basically, just sort of according to I'm going to just sort of report based on the words of the motion. So the peace officers in the city are a part of one of 4 retirement tier groups. Most belong to fire and police pensions. And then a smaller group employed exclusively at the airport belong to LACER's public safety tier. And then there's even a smaller group that belong to LACER's tier 1. And finally, just a few park rangers belong to LACER's tier 2. So as it relates to the disability retirement benefit, that benefit is the same for those who are in LAFPP and LACER's public safety tier. That is that service-connected disabilities have a 30 to 90% retirement benefit that is determined by an evaluation board based on the circumstances of the claim. Non-service connected disabilities have a 30 to 50% retirement benefit, also determined by an evaluation board. LACER's Tier 1 has a fixed retirement allowance of 33.33%, regardless if the claim is service connected or not. Also, there's a 5-year vesting requirement to receive this benefit under LACER's Tier 1. Unlike the others, unlike the other LAFPP benefit, which doesn't have a vesting requirement, the LACER's one has a 5-year vesting requirement. I'm sorry I said that. Okay, so you're eligible as soon as you graduate from the academy and you enter the retirement system in the fire and police model and the LACER's public safety tier, not the case with LACER's Tier 1. And then finally, LACER's Tier 2 has a very moderate disability benefit that requires 10 years of service and has a very small percentage-based formula that determines the benefit based on the years of service. So nearly all 83 officers mentioned in the motion are members of LACER's Tier 1. But there are 4 park rangers in that group that are members of LACER's Tier 3. In order to do any sort of analysis of of the cost of making any changes, an actuarial study would have to be done to determine the cost of upgrading the current benefit and creating a new tier. So presumably a higher benefit would yield a higher cost. So the actuary would also calculate how much it would be to sort of true up the past years of service, as well as the ongoing increase for the benefit. So then after the study is done, then the city and labor would get together and discuss the cost, and more specifically determine who has to pay for what and how those payments are going to be made. So the city has done these sorts of actuarial studies before, and we've actually even constructed LACER's Tier 1 public safety tier. We constructed it using this model, this method. So that same type of analysis would have to be done if we were to move forward with any kind of change to the current set of benefits for the employees in the various tiers.
And well, thank you for that presentation. You answered virtually all of my questions. I would just ask, other than the actuarial study, is there anything else that has to be done to add these members to the public safety tier of LACERs?
Well, actually, I don't believe, and I did not ask a LACER's representative to come with me today. However, I have had several conversations with LACERs because there was a letter of agreement in MOU 30 that we would do an actuarial study that dealt with not only this particular disability piece, but other enhanced benefits that were similar to the public safety tier. And according to LACER's representatives, the public safety tier is closed. And so we would not be adding people to the public safety tier, not to mention the fact that what we're talking about today is just an enhanced disability piece. So we would have to actually just build a new tier for them that would just have the enhanced disability piece that we're speaking of. I think that outside of doing the actuarial study, obviously we would need to get EERC and council approval in order to move forward with, because it has a financial impact. And then the only other piece that is super important is to negotiate who pays for what. In the past, we've had different models where, in cases where, the airport did its public safety tier, the airport as a department was able to and picked up a large part of the cost for the true up. Obviously, in this case, these employees, for the most part, are general funded. And so we would have to negotiate exactly how we would go about the payment.
Thank you. Colleagues, any questions? If not, I would move that we approve this item. Mr. Clerk, if we could have a roll call.
Yes, Councilmember Koretz.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonin.
Yes.
Very good.
That item passes unanimously. Thank you. Item number 7.
Item 7, CO report relative to the Park Rangers Unit 2020-2022 Memorandum of Understanding, MOU 65.
Good afternoon, Paul Gerard from the CAO's office, Employee Relations Division. We're bringing to you today MOU 65, which is a brand new MOU that would cover park rangers and senior park rangers. There are currently 28 employees in both of the classifications, 20 park rangers and 8 senior park rangers. The basis for the MOU is MOU 30, where the park rangers were located before the creation of a standalone unit. The only differences between MOU 30 and the current MOU 65 for your consideration are the following. That, number one, the 10% contribution that park rangers make towards their healthcare premiums would end on December 31st, 2021, as opposed to December 31st, 2022. that there would be no unpaid meal break in MOU 65, and there is an additional bonus in MOU 65 for members, park rangers, who are qualified to operate a water tender equipment, which is used to assist LAFD with fire suppression.
How many employees will be covered by this MOU?
A total of 28, 20 park rangers and 8 senior park rangers.
And how's the no unpaid section, which I think is no unpaid code 7, how is it in line with MOU 24?
MOU 24 has an assumption that there will be no unpaid code 7, with the exception of that the chief can order an unpaid meal break in certain shifts. And the same provision applies to MOU 65, where the default is that there will be no unpaid meal break during a shift, unless the chief park ranger makes a determination that one should be implemented, and then he has the authority to call for either a 30 or a 45-minute meal break that would be unpaid according to various shifts that the park rangers work.
Thank you. Any other questions? Any other comments? If not, I would move that we approve the CAO's recommendation. We could have a roll call.
Councilmember Koretz?
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson?
Yes.
Councilmember Bonin?
Yes.
Very good.
Thank you.
That item passes. I'm going to ask that we take up items 10 and 11 together because they're sort of inextricably tied together.
I'll go ahead and read
And
them.
I'd say when the city controller first embarked on doing this audit of the city's HHH homeless housing process in 2017, the process was really just getting started. But as the audits progressed, various patterns emerged and evolved, which highlighted noteworthy flaws in the way the city's been approaching the creation of supportive housing for the homeless. It's now clear that left to its own devices, the HHH process produces units that are too costly and does it too slowly. Some of this stems from impediments inherent in the development process that are embedded in the system, either because they're statutorily necessary or because our constituents demand them as a function of political accountability. And some of it stems from decisions we've made. In that difficult environment, we've tried solution after solution for years, only to see the problem continue to get worse. So now as we deal with external legal pressures, a pandemic, and continued human tragedy, the challenge to find more and better solutions which can be implemented more effectively and efficiently is as compelling as it's ever been. And as both audits show, we need to find ways to cope with the organic impediments while overcoming those for which we have options and choices to make. And today I hope we can review these audits and have a substantive and productive conversation about how we can improve the HHH process as the city may contemplate a possible second homeless housing ballot measure at some unspecified point in the future. And we want to work all the bugs out of the process, certainly by then. We clearly have a shared goal to become more responsive to the enormous need we have in Los Angeles to provide housing for the tens of thousands of our neighbors experiencing homelessness, while showing taxpayers and constituents all sides of the issue and showing them the respect that they deserve. So with that, I would start with asking for the Controller's Office to give us an overview of their reports relative to the review of Prop HHH.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you to the chair and members of the committee. It's great to virtually be here with you today. I'm Devang Panchal, Chief Internal Auditor. here at the Controller's Office, and I'm joined by our Director of Auditing, Bob Wingenroth. We appreciate the opportunity to discuss our reviews of Proposition HHH. As you mentioned, it's really important that the city do everything it can to move this process forward. And we'd like to also thank hsid and the CAO for their time and expertise during this process. Neither of these reports would be possible without their input. So with that being said, the big takeaway from both reports is that, as you mentioned, HHH projects are expensive to build and have timelines that don't necessarily align with our growing homelessness crisis. Before we get into the recommendations, here's some of what we found in our reports. First, the city has committed nearly all of the $1.2 billion authorized by the ballot measure, and we'll come back to that later. Of the amount that's been committed, about 95% has been set aside for supportive and affordable housing. Two, in regard to project costs, we know that it takes lots of time and money to build multifamily housing in Los Angeles. That's not news to anyone here. But those challenges are further magnified when it comes to building supportive housing. Several additional factors come into play, like increased financing complexity, prevailing wage requirements, land use issues, and layers of competing policy priorities. Also, in terms of costs, and this is really important, HHH funds typically make up about $140,000 per unit, and the remaining funding often comes from entities like the county, the state, and the federal government. So even if the city is not fully funding these projects using HHH funds, they typically include tax credits and other buckets of public money. So since we issued our last report, per unit costs have continued to grow. hsid recently reported that multiple projects are experiencing some unforeseen cost increases, so these estimates may creep upward in the coming months. As of September 2020, when we issued our last report, the average cost of units in construction was approximately $530,000, and the estimated cost of units in pre-development was approximately $558,000. Now, of the pool of units in pre-development, nearly a third of them are projected to exceed $600,000. That being said, there were also more than a dozen projects estimated at less than $450,000 per unit. Now, that could be a reflection of the construction market at the time those contracts were signed, or more importantly, it could suggest that lower cost projects are indeed viable here in Los Angeles. In regard to project timelines, we learned that it takes up to 6 years from concept to occupancy to develop a supportive housing project. And one of the biggest challenges facing developers is the lengthy and complex process of assembling funding. Another challenge that comes to the forefront during conversations about this issue are the obstacles developers face when it comes to obtaining permits from city departments. The city's taken steps to streamline this process, but we have yet to see performance metrics that demonstrate the impact of these efforts. So as of December 2020, more than 4 years after Angelino's approved Proposition HHH, 7 projects were completed with 361 supportive housing units. There are 39 additional projects under construction and 65 in various stages of pre-development. Again, December 2020. So all in all, based on current estimates, which I think we all know are fluid for a number of different reasons, more than 42% of total units in the pipeline will not be available until sometime after January 2023. So before we move into the recommendations, we should acknowledge the city's efforts to lower project costs and shorten timelines through the HHH Housing Challenge. But those projects remain in pre-development, and so we'll continue to monitor their progress as we go forward. So what should the city do? Part of our challenge in crafting these recommendations is that the growing homelessness crisis means we need more of everything. More supportive housing, more interim housing, more showers, more restrooms, more storage, more everything. We've tried to evaluate the program knowing that unsheltered Angelinos have significantly higher mortality rates and living out on the streets puts them in harm's way. Our first report included two primary recommendations, and the first of which was that the city should consider repurposing funds from housing projects with high costs. Based on our analysis, the city's funding commitments are not binding contracts until loans are closed. Given that, we believe that funds set aside for expensive or stalled projects should be redirected to projects with lower costs or interim housing and facilities. And the second recommendation from the first report was that the city, and there's been some movement on this front, the city should further streamline permitting and other processes to ensure that projects currently in the pipeline are completed as quickly as possible. Now, our second report, which was released this past September, explored what the city should do with remaining HHH funds, roughly $30 million at the time, and any additional funds that may become available from unsuccessful projects. In particular, we considered how these funds could be quickly put to use given the spike in homelessness we saw last year and the onset of the pandemic. That report included two primary recommendations. And the first is that the city should prioritize acquisition, rehabilitation, and adaptive reuse opportunities. In looking at the projects, the largest cost driver for each project is construction. So we surmise that acquiring and converting an existing building may often be faster and less expensive than starting from scratch. This idea is consistent with research published by the GAO and the Turner Center for Housing Innovation, and the city's recent accomplishments with Project Home Key suggest that this may be a promising approach. And the second recommendation from the second report was that the city should focus on interim housing and facilities to help unsheltered Angelenos. Although we recognize that the city has taken steps to expand interim housing using other funding sources, HHH funds could potentially be used to supplement those efforts. So that concludes our presentation. Again, we appreciate the opportunity to discuss this issue, and we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for the presentation. And I have a number of questions, although they're generally for the CAO and for hsid. I have enough of them that I don't want my colleagues to just have to sit and listen to me ask questions. So I'm going to instead try to separate them into categories and ask you to join in on each category. So the questions I have either fit into general questions, questions about costs, questions about planning and permitting, and programming strategies. So I'll start with a few general questions. And whomever is appropriate can answer them. In what ways has the pandemic impacted the HHH processes and timeline? And Anne, I don't know if you want to answer that.
Sure, I can certainly talk about that. Good afternoon, everybody. Ann Sewell, General Manager, Housing Community Investment Department of the City of Los Angeles. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about HHH. So the pandemic definitely has slowed some of the construction and construction-related functions. Submitting plans for plan check, getting things approved, getting things inspected, et cetera, are all a little bit slowed, but not significantly during the pandemic. And it has slowed in varying ways the activities of the other places that Devang mentioned that our partners go to for money. So some of the state and local agencies where we go. Nevertheless, despite the pandemic, from July to now, the 20 projects closed construction loans and started construction. So they were able to get permits and get moving forward on them. So it has not completely stopped. With the emergency order that the mayor signed in March when we all went home for the pandemic, was a tolling order that extended commitment periods of the loan commitments that each HHH project, when approved by the was given a 2-year period to secure entitlements and funding. And so that tolling order from March to now is still in effect for each project that had not yet gotten to the point of loan closing.
And I know there are questions about trying to come up with performance metrics. So what's delayed finalizing performance metrics to measure the impact of increasing the speed at which HHH and affordable housing projects move through the development pipeline? And what performance metrics would you suggest? I guess this would be a question for the controller and for the CAO.
So, hi, good afternoon. This is Yolanda Chavez with the CAO. So I did want to point out one thing that I think the controller failed to mention. As you probably know, one of the requirements in the bond language is that the controller issue an annual financial audit of the bonds annually, which are attached to this report but were not mentioned. And both audits that have been completed are clean. So I wanted to note that the only requirement the controller has is to issue an annual financial audit, not to evaluate the Prop HHH program. I mean, the controller has chosen to do that, which we appreciate, although we have requested that maybe they should be using housing finance experts to evaluate the program instead of, with all due respect to our colleagues at the controller's office, instead of financial auditors, because they do the financial audit, and again, both have been clean, and we expect that the ones that will come for this year will also be clean. In terms of performance audits, I believe, or performance metrics, it's in the development cycle, it's really about what the program has set out in terms of time, right? So the program that you approved under Prop HHH is that you give the developer a commitment for 2 years, and in those 2 years, but they get the commitments if they have site control, right? So they have to have site control. You're not giving anyone a commitment just because they want to build housing. They've identified the land, they have site control, and they have 2 years to basically get the other funding sources to start construction. So the way the program has been developed and what you have approved in terms of timing and metrics, for the most part, developers are meeting. So all of those metrics are actually within HSID's annual NOFA that you approve, that you and the mayor approve.
So I know HSID is authorized, of the units HSID's authorized, only 77% of the projects are supportive housing. Why isn't that figure higher? Does that mean HHH financing is being used to develop market rate units as well? Or what are the other 23% constituted by?
So that's a number we need to clarify a little bit, Councilman. So there are 3 kinds of units that are authorized to be built with HHH funding, separate from the interim facilities. There's units for chronically homeless people, which is defined as people who have been experiencing homelessness on the street for 12 months or more. Units for homeless people who are homeless right this very second, and units for very low income people at risk of homelessness. When most of the developers that are experienced at doing this work with those populations, they don't tend to restrict every single unit as a unit for homeless people or chronically homeless people, because it is really hard sometimes, especially like with chronically homeless, to prove. It's not like you punch a clock, today I became homeless and it's 12 months later. It's really hard to prove some of those characteristics. And when a lot of our developers, as DeBang mentioned, are getting multiple sources of funding, so they might have a requirement in one project to have homeless people, chronically homeless people, people who we require that 11% of the people have mobility, accessibility needs, and 4% have hearing vision needs. The county may require that X number of percent of people have chronic and pervasive mental illness. You know, there's veterans, there's seniors. It's a matrix of needs. And having a little flexibility where people, all you have to prove is that they have very low income, allows people to merge people around and meet those various needs. So when we compare the list of the 77%, which are the covenants that we've put on about homelessness or chronic homelessness, and then we compare it with the contracts that HACLA is providing for Section 8 vouchers, and the contracts our county counterparts are providing for case management, those contracts are much higher because in reality, these buildings are almost 100% for homeless people and chronically homeless people, but they are just giving themselves that documentation leeway to be able to, so we have the information from HACLA that it's not, we have not covenanted it to be that higher number.
So it could be people who are very low income or homeless, but aren't necessarily in need of supportive housing, for example. If they just found a roof over their heads, they have a modestly paying job and are otherwise functional. So that would count as an example.
In some buildings, it is a mix like that. But in most buildings, especially whenever a project uses the project-based vouchers or the contracts from the city, they are required under the Continuum of Care and the way our money comes from HUD, they are required to use what's called the coordinated entry system to select tenants, and every one of those tenants actually needs supportive housing. They are not just in need of affordable housing. So it's pretty much targeted to people who need fairly strong supports within their supportive housing.
Okay, and I have one more question in this category, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. The pre-development phase, which the financing package is assembled, apparently has to be done in sequence, which causes it to take a year or two on the project timeline. Is there any way to allow some of these approvals to be done simultaneously and reduce that timeline?
There has been talk for several years now of trying to do what we've referred to as a universal application. Think of it much like applying to the University of California across multiple campuses, which would help a little bit, but not, it wouldn't move things a lot because each one of those funding sources has a review process and a board that sits. In the case of tax credits, it's out of the treasurer's office in the state. In the case of, some of the No Place Like Home funds, it's the county. So each one of those has a different process. One of the things we saw with Project Home Key that kind of made our eyes light up was it's so much easier when all those people just give us the money. And so that may be a path that we want to explore. What happened if we went beyond, the universal application to a much more integrated approach where reviews would actually be integrated, not just applications. But right now, no, the system is, even if you hit the deadlines exactly right, it is a sequential system.
Presumably anything we do to speed up the process because of carrying costs for the developers just by nature will save them money.
Absolutely.
Colleagues, other general questions?
I haven't got any questions on this, but I do have comments, and I am happy to be back on this committee under your leadership, Mr. Koretz, but I hate to come in such an obtuse way. I found this report relatively, an audit relatively off-putting because it was done by people who haven't developed a single unit of housing. So they don't have any basis to say if money's being used well or not. When you talk to people who actually develop housing, they will tell you there isn't much skin there, and what skin there is there, what room there is there for improvement, usually is not just not in control of the developer. It's very little of it's even in control of the city. Even though there are a lot of levers I think we can pull and ways that we can improve. A lot of it is state and federal, and so again, it's important to point those things to light. But I just it gets under my craw when services or benefits for poor people come up. It gets all kinds of examination. I've been here 6 years. I haven't seen an audit like this of any function of the police department at all, in any way, and that's our biggest department. And so I just, I want to go on the record saying that again, I thank everybody for their interest. I'm glad you're interested, but the interest feels disingenuous when it isn't presented in a way that can actually move the ball forward. So that's my 2 cents. I'll try to be quiet the rest of the committee, Mr. Chair.
Oh, no need to do that, but we're happy to have your input. Mr. Bonin.
I'm not going to try to top or outdo that. Ditto.
Okay. All right, then I'll move on to a couple questions on cost. And obviously that's been a much bandied about concern. The fact that the costs have moved to the point where there are units that are 600,000 to 700,000 a unit or more have certainly attracted attention and criticism. So I'd like to ask a few things about that. Although I should also point out that that's not the cost to the city. The city leverages its costs, which I think are running around 135,000 a unit. And so that's just the total cost, but that's not all coming out of our hide. Prop HHH says that the CAO issues and administers the bonds to be financed for the project or the projects, and hsid administers the projects with oversight by the Citizens Oversight Committee and the Administrative Oversight Committee. So do the administering entities, do they, what are their different functions, and do they have individual audits of their activities in this regard?
So the Citizens Oversight Committee reviews all funding recommendations, policy recommendations related to the program, and forwards their recommendations to the Administrative Oversight Committee, who does the same thing, evaluates the policy recommendations, funding recommendations, and if in agreement, forwards those recommendations to the City Council. So that is what they do. As you know, the Citizens Oversight Committee are private citizens that are appointed by the mayor and council. The Administrative Oversight Committee is comprised of the CAO as the chair, the CLA, and the mayor and the mayor's office.
Okay, and the audit makes the point that the rapid issuance of bonds one after another contributes to inflated interest costs. Why was the second bond issued rather than spending down the funds from the first bond issuance first?
We actually disputed that finding and gave, I believe, the controller something in writing to dispute it from our bond advisor and counsel. So we don't believe that's actually true. So, and we haven't issued additional bonds since the first two issuances because we wanted to have that funding expended before we issued additional bonds. You should know, and part of the reason that we didn't, it was not because it increases interest rates, which is not correct. It's because, as you know, as we issue bonds, that bill is then sent to the county because it goes on our tax bill for property owners. So we wanted to ensure the funds were expended before we issued additional funds. But we issued the first two issuances because there were enough projects that had been approved for that funding, but have not since the first two. And we're still waiting to assess when we should be issuing the third, and that's going to depend on when hsid will need the cash for the projects that are coming online or starting construction.
But you don't think things in the sequencing of the bonds and when they were issued had a negative impact on our bonds?
No, not at all. And again, we strongly dispute that, and I'd be happy to send that opinion from our bond advisor and bond counsel.
Yes, we'd be happy to see that too. So thank you if you would forward that. Now we know funds are spent by developers on entitlements. Were funds spent on entitlement requests for off-menu density bonus conditional use processing?
Every project has a different story based on what its underlying zoning and zoning restrictions might be. The entire portfolio of HHH projects, when AB 1197 was approved, not this last September, but the one before, became exempt from CEQA. And so a lot of the things that would have, things like paths that developers might have taken that required conditional use permits and things like that, you know, they had other options at that point. So probably less so, but in some projects, they might have required zone change or density bonus, things or other. There's a lot of different ways that projects can get approved depending on what the conditions are on the site, whether there's T and Q conditions, whether they can use the on-menu density bonus. It really varies site to site.
And why did HSID decide to build rather than buying existing buildings and rehab them?
Okay, this is one of the findings that to me is miss the point. The reason that the 2016 Comprehensive Homeless Strategy talked about doing something like HHH was that the city is roughly 500,000 units short of what we need to house low and moderate income people in the city. We need housing production, whether it's for people who need supportive housing or affordable housing. Buying an existing apartment building in a city that is already overcrowded and underhoused doesn't do anything to address that problem. In fact, it just, who do we think is living in the existing apartment building right now? So it's, in fact, and we've gone through things like the Wiggins lawsuit in downtown, where we clearly said we are not going to buy buildings that are currently in use for SROs or affordable housings or affordable housing already. We are going to build new. In the case of the Project Home Key stuff, which is somewhat specialized, we are actually repurposing a commercial property to residential, really taking advantage of the fact that the need for that commercial property right now when tourism is down is sufficiently depressed that they are coming on the market. So, but generally speaking, buying an existing apartment building is exactly what we do not want to be doing when we're trying to add to the housing stock and expand opportunities for people who need housing.
I think you're partly on track of what I'm actually addressing, which is there are a lot of commercial buildings now that are half empty, more than half empty, might be convertible all in part to housing, all or in part to housing. And so we have a lot of opportunities as malls are starting to go under, and our large property opportunities as commercial buildings and office buildings become less in demand. Can we be looking at converting those to affordable housing? And should we be looking at that?
So we have been tracking with brokers that we work with a lot, whether those sorts of buildings are going on the market yet, the way that we saw with motels and hotels. And so far, none of the reports are that there's a rush to market the way that there were with the motels and hotels. I think people are still waiting to see what happens when people return to work. But it's an idea. It's also, the thing about supportive housing, most of the HHH projects are studios and one-bedroom units. They're a little bit expensive because the things in a unit that cost a lot of money are things that have plumbing. Your bathrooms and your kitchen cost a lot of money. Your living room, much less so. So motels and hotels have those, every little room has its own bathroom and stuff. A big office building would probably need a lot more work to bring those kind of plumbing fixtures and things like that into it. It's not clear that we would actually save a lot of money in that rehab, but it's worth looking at. So we have been talking with the county and with several of the brokers that we all work with and track things with, and nobody's said, yeah, I'm starting to see a flood of things, but we are watching that.
Yeah, I think it'd be too early for the flood, especially since most of those office buildings still have some people leasing, here and there. So they don't know whether they empty them out or maybe move them onto some floors and convert some floors. But there's a lot of opportunities, so hopefully we're at least looking at that. Colleagues, any questions on costs? Hearing none, have a couple questions on planning. The audit notes that HHH developers feel that a major area in which the city can improve the process is the city's approval and permitting processes, which I think could use streamlining in general, but particularly in this area of such great emergency. I know that city planning has developed a supportive housing ordinance, which has been stuck in litigation, and the state is mandating some streamlining procedures, and I don't know how extensively we've implemented them. So I have a couple questions on that. One, the adaptive reuse ordinance permits the ministerial conversion of obsolete commercial structures into live-work apartments and hotels, but it doesn't right now have an option for supportive housing. Have supportive housing developers identified an amendment to this ordinance as a viable way to reduce construction costs? Have people been asking for this yet at all?
Not to use the adaptive reuse ordinance, and I'd like to correct some. You may be quoting from the earlier audit. So the permanent supportive housing zoning ordinance, along with every single HHH funded project, was fully exempted from CEQA by AB 1197, so which resolved the litigation that had been brought by, I think, one property owner in Venice. So it is not under litigation. It is being fully used. And we had a meeting of about 15 different developers with the head of Department of Building and Safety, Department of City Planning, myself, and the mayor's team on last Friday to identify, okay, we've made some progress, but what are the rocks in the river? What can we blow up? And frankly, I need to talk to my colleagues in the controller's office, because how we pay these people came up quite a bit. Obviously, my own department has a lot of barriers we could remove, and there's things in DWP and things in fire and different parts of the building and safety checklist. But you know what? Planning had done a really great job of already, through the supportive housing ordinance and some other streamlining work, really, addressing a lot of the things that made things go faster. So the good news is we've seen that it can work. We can make things. We've saved every single parking space that you do in a podium or a subterranean lot costs about $40,000 to $60,000 a space. The supportive housing zoning ordinance got rid of millions of dollars in every project because they dropped from providing 40 parking spaces, which most of them weren't needed, to 7 for staff and visitors, since most of the residents didn't use them. So that's millions in savings across the portfolio in the projects that were designed after that became effective. So planning's doing a great job, and the rest of us will step up and we will continue to get better at it.
And we've been looking at, by the way, drafting a motion to amend the adaptive reuse ordinance to add supportive housing. So we'll continue to look at that and have conversations with your department and planning. It's my understanding the current state law requires local entities to streamline their housing projects that contain a minimum amount of supportive housing by turning it into a ministerial approval process. How has the city implemented this, if it has, and have entitlement consulting costs dropped significantly as a result if we already have implemented it?
That's a really good question. So the whole point of becoming ministerial is that you were somewhat CEQA buffered. So now with our magic 1197 wand, we laugh in the face of ministerial versus, non-ministerial issues. But what we were hearing from the developers last week is it still takes them a whole matrix to be prepared by their entitlement consultant to look at the best path to choose when they are trying to wend their way through certain kinds of menu items on the density bonus, using the supportive housing zoning ordinance, or using the law that you're referring to, I think, council member, is SB 35, that allows them to, as long as they provide some housing, some supportive housing or some affordable housing, they are streamlined through some of the processes. So it's not that we have gotten rid of the need for entitlement consultants, and until we address the problem of our odd little zoning T and Q conditions, we probably will not really have a simple system that makes it as fast as we would like it to be.
So how do we go about doing that?
That I would probably need to defer to my colleagues in planning, but my understanding is it would be that we are doing it in part community plan by community plan as we update those, and each community plan requires a CEQA process, and those T and Q conditions are beloved of some people, so that will be a community discussion.
Okay, and the audit points out that state regulations and practices might be a major impediment to the city establishing innovations in the development of HHH and affordable housing. What's the status of efforts to address that issue?
I'm sorry, quote the beginning of that, council member, again.
Asking about state regulations and practices, and are we trying to work with the state to change anything that we've identified to make it easier to develop affordable housing?
I think, most of the ways that we interact with the state on the supportive housing is in the various funding streams. And so that really gets to the sequential issue. The most, I think, with the supportive housing zoning ordinance and 1197, we have not needed other help from the state in terms of entitlements. One of the things as we move more into using modular housing, what you do is the building and safety reviews and inspects everything that happens on the site, which is actually about 60% of the cost occurs on the site. It's your grading, your foundation, your electrical vault, all that kind of stuff. And then the Department of Housing and Community Development of the state inspects everything that happens in the factory, which is, from the foundation up to the roof. And so we have to integrate with them. We are still relatively new in that, so that will be something interesting to look at next year. But we don't anticipate problems so much as it's a learning curve for us, for our accessibility program, and for the state.
Colleagues, any other questions relating to planning and permitting? Mr. Bonnet.
Just a quick one. Thanks, Ann, for your testimony. This is the second time today I've heard you talk about the queue conditions, and I have learned over the years that anything a developer doesn't like in the city system bleeds into any conversation about affordable housing as their way to get it addressed. Certainly not implying that's what you're doing here, but I've learned the hard way to ask for some data. How often has a Triple H project run into a queue condition?
So my colleague Daniel Wynn, who has joined us 4 weeks ago, used to be one of those developers, a true affordable developer, not one of the ones who just leans on queue conditions. I would guess in the Valley, Daniel, where you were developing mostly, it's all the time, or at least half the time?
Yeah, definitely in the Valley. Hi, Daniel. Nice to meet all of you. I would say probably 1 out of 3 sites we would end up facing a queue condition, and just specifically, it would reduce the residential density on, say, a C2 lot. And so we would roughly, 33% of the time be faced with that. Let alone, I think, site acquisition of developers do take a long time. Finding the right site that will, again, due to all the layered financing, requires that developers be as economical in purchasing sites, and oftentimes they range roughly around $50,000 to $80,000 per unit, and that's that's a dilemma that most developers are facing.
So are we talking, when you talk about the queue conditions, are we talking about something that would eliminate queue conditions for all projects, good and bad ones, or just not have queue conditions apply to projects that have a significant, and by significant I mean, mostly, not 10% affordability?
So queue conditions affect what you can do with the site over and above the zoning around. So you have your underlying zoning, and then there's a specific condition. Sometimes that only applies to that site or a whole, block. We were just looking at a site that a council office, not represented on this call, brought to us for, a publicly owned site to be developed as affordable housing, where there was a key condition that dropped the use of the site from 30 units down to 10 units. And you don't really notice those things at first blush until you really get into it. So I'd really defer to my colleagues in planning, but it seems to me they are a form of spot zoning, which is strongly discouraged in the code.
No need to get into it in any great detail today. I was just curious because I heard it twice. Thanks.
Any other questions in this area? All right, then the last area that I have a couple questions on is in program strategies. And in the normal course of running a program like HHH, there are a variety of operational decisions that have to be made about individual projects and overall strategies. And the audit mentions several issues that fall into the strategic category that I'd like to ask about. One is that homeless support facilities are eligible for HHH financing, but only 2 rounds of RFPs were issued for facilities. And it's become clear that we need drop-in centers and storage facilities and combinations of the two more than ever. And that's especially the case while we're waiting for HHH housing units to be built, and the audit in court encourages the development of them. When are we going to see more facilities projects, and is there much of an effort in this arena?
I was holding back to see if Yolanda wanted to say something, but you're muted.
I apologize. So I think where you're seeing the facilities is our shift to funding interim housing with, as we discussed earlier today, through a bridge home and through now the roadmap. We only issued 2 rounds of facility RFPs because, to be honest, we were not getting service providers interested in expanding capacity, so building new shelters. It was more about minor rehab work to existing facilities. As you know, we did fund 4 navigation centers within the city, but we need beds, right? And so when we shifted to ABH, and there was a major policy discussion, I should say, before I get into ABH, within the Citizens Oversight Committee and the Administrative Oversight Committee about the best use of the money, because, as they say, if you build it, they would come. Prop HHH was approved by the voters, and developers stepped out and secured land. And so it was never expected that most of the money would be, and at this point, all of the money is committed, except for maybe around 30 million, right, of the 1.2 billion in terms of authority. And so that happened within 3 years. So developers did step up and went out to find land and secure it. And so the COC, AOC, and the city council and mayor, because we took the recommendation through the process, agreed that we should focus Prop HHH bond funds on permanent housing units, and and that we focus our state homeless grants to develop more interim beds and facilities, which is what we've done.
Councilmember, if I could add to that, I was in a public meeting, a Chamber of Commerce meeting recently with a colleague from the county when this question came up, and he said, what we see going on right now, when we see, ambulances dropping people off at emergency rooms and they have to stay in a cot in the emergency room, we don't say, oh my gosh, we need to build more emergency rooms. We say we need more ICU beds, or we need to all put our masks on and keep them on, or whatever. To say that we need more shelters, we are definitely doing that with other resources, but HHH is the only major resource available to the city for the real thing that we need, which is housing for people. There's no point in building a whole bunch of shelters when there isn't any place to move people through to housing. And the other real challenge, and one of my real concerns with the audit was, once you are in a supportive housing unit and you have your rental voucher and your contract with the county to provide case management services and all that, you are basically set. You are paying, you're able to pay the rent that pays for all the operating costs. Nobody needs to come along every year and commit a new contract for operating. Interim housing and shelters cost somewhere between $50 and $135 per night to operate. You have to have security staff and food and all those things. We don't have that money, so to shift all that money over, it's not just a capital problem. It's what does it cost to do over the long haul in terms of operating funds? And once we've built one of these supportive housing units, it's good to go for 55 years. And so we need to take that investment rather than expenditure view, and this is the only source of money that lets us do that.
And I think the way you need to think about it, which the audit does not, is it's a continuum of care, right? So as Ann said, someone goes from interim housing, our goal is to get them into a permanent unit. But if we don't have that permanent unit, we can't sustain funding interim housing forever. And so saying, oh, just fund interim housing makes no sense in the continuum of care, and if we actually want to solve this problem, because the only way to solve it is with permanent units.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know in my district, and I presume in others, affordable housing developers face a certain number of problems, like having DWP hit them with latent process increases after financing packages are already assembled. And the audit recommends the creation of a city concierge to help shepherd these projects and address issues of this sort. Is the Executive Directive 13 cabinet this? And if so, is it helping? And if not, is anything further being contemplated to get us there?
So I don't know if there's anybody from the mayor's office on the call, but Azim in the mayor's office is that concierge. He works with the mayor's team on the housing challenge and HHH projects, and is part of the housing cabinet that you mentioned. So yes, all of the developers go to him when they are stuck with fire or DWP or whatever, and he's part of that solution.
So he's sort of the key concierge person as this was envisioned.
Yes, exactly.
And we sent him to you with our compliments. He was in my office previously.
Yep. Thank you.
And I am sure he's doing a great job in this regard. Also, the audit and Councilmember De Leon have both raised questions about reprogramming previously committed funding. Is there a deadline by which HSID would determine if it solicits proposals for new supportive housing or facilities projects using the funds that were left over or become available from unsuccessful projects that weren't completed?
So there is. So as we mentioned before, a project comes in, it has a site, it goes through the process, and the council approves a commitment for 2 years, and it wends its way along. The commitment that it has at that time is based on an estimate, and estimate not only of how much it's going to cost, but how much it will secure from all those other sources. So right now we know that we have roughly 30 million left over, completely untouched. And we also know that a number of those projects that are going through actually, because of some good stuff that happened very quietly in the stimulus bill, the last one, that increased the value of the low-income housing tax credits that all these projects are keeping, a number of them will not actually need all their money. So we expect to, as part of the final approvals, when we go through doing the final loan agreements, there will be funds to be reduced from those commitments, and come back into the pot. So this morning when I said I was pretty sure we'd have between 30 and 50 million dollars, that's probably a conservative estimate of how much we'll be able to secure back from the group of projects that will benefit from that. There are also a couple other projects, some of which have embarrassed us by being in the LA Times, and others are just quietly wending their way through, that for various reasons will not proceed. They won't pass the background check or other things, and that we will recapture them. But generally speaking, these are commitments that the city has made, and we have the ability to say, for reasons of things turning up later, that we don't want to move forward with those commitments. But to wholesale, there are 29 projects right now that we expect will need to get their final financing commitments in the next year. To say to those 29 developers, 29 groups who have spent cumulatively millions and millions on sites and entitlements and whatever, that we are thinking maybe you'd look pewter as an interim housing thing, is extremely damaging to the process and the credibility of the program with the development community. So we need to come to some resolution on that fairly quickly and move forward.
And I have a last question in this arena, which is, have we looked at shared housing in the way that a couple nonprofits have of buying single-family homes or duplexes and allowing a couple people in each room with a bunk bed situation, so that you could buy a single-family home and maybe put 6 people in it, and with relatively modest expense to set it up. Have we looked at that as a city process, and are we considering any step forward in that arena?
So with the HHH supportive housing part, we wouldn't look at that, because the whole idea there of serving chronically homeless and homeless people required a certain concentration on the site to support the case management staff. So we've set a minimum number of units or people of 20, but I don't know whether we've considered that under the facilities side. I know that our partners at the county are doing some of that.
And I presume, again, it would be a slightly different population of folks that are normally functional and housed and paying their rent, but for one reason or another run into a bad patch, and it might be used for rapid rehousing or something in that direction, with people that have some sort of an income.
Yes, and I would add, Mr. Chair, that LASA does fund, through its rapid rehousing program, shared housing, just like this. Just like as you described, we're also going to pilot with the HAP funds for youth, a shared housing program for youth.
Right. Other questions, colleagues? Anything remaining? Mr. Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Koretz, for bringing up shared housing. I'm delighted to not be the first person in any given meeting to do it. I get responses, but I do want to note we do not do nearly enough of it, and we do not do it well enough.
And I think most of what is being done in your district, so I commend you for that. And We've tried to get some through nonprofits in mine, and I think there might be one or two, but minimal start in CD5. Well, thank you everyone for your presentations and questions and answers. And I'm going to ask that we continue both 10 and 11 for 2 weeks, and ask that the following reports be heard at our next meeting. One, that city planning provide a report back on the issue of planning and permitting and AB 2162 and Prop HHH in general, and that hsid provide a written report and their verbal response to the controller's recommendations directly, so we can have a discussion about those recommendations at our next meeting as well. So we'll just continue that item without objection. And I believe now we would go to our special meeting.
Mr. Chair, item number 8 is still remaining.
Item number 8 should also be on consent. If I erred in not listing that, I thought I had actually.
Let me check. Yes, I'm in error. You're absolutely correct. Very good.
But I don't believe anything else is on this agenda in terms of business from the regular meeting.
As clear as
So
the
I'd ask, if the desk is cleared, then we can move to the special meeting.
Okay, 1 minute.
So we would start with a roll call.
Yes, Councilmember Koretz.
Present.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Here.
Councilmember Bonin.
Here.
Very good.
And I would ask that we hear all items 1 through 8 together, and that first we check and see if there are any speakers in the queue to speak at the special meeting. Mr. Hirsch, do we have anyone on the queue?
Mr. Chair, we'll have to reestablish a connection. Please hold.
D followed by pound. Enter your participant ID followed. You are in the meeting now. There are 2 participants in the meeting. You are muted. You can mute. You are unmuted.
Mr. Chair, I believe we are established again.
Okay, so if we have any speakers, if we could start calling them for testimony.
I'm sorry, sir. Are you ready to present the item, or you mean public comment speakers?
Yeah, public comment speakers
Oh, okay.
first.
I'm sorry. Thank you.
What we're doing with our technical difficulties, if we're ready yet to call them.
We are connected.
Sounds like we're still having technical difficulties. something isn't working properly.
Yes, I'd like to speak. Can you pigs hear me?
Yes, you have.
Yes.
There's
It's so good to hear you.
There seems to be a queue for the public comment.
The what? Hello.
Somebody calling the folks one at a time for public comment?
Yes. I would like to sign a speaker card for the public comment for the Special Political Action Committee of North Korea.
Well, I can't tell if he's in the queue since nobody's introducing the speakers. So perhaps we should just let him speak. You'll have 2 minutes on the items. No general public comment at the special meeting.
Yes. Very good, yes. Why take chances on violating the Brown Act any further? So today, we have technical difficulties with the MOU. It stands for
I'm sorry you're off topic. Please speak to the items. It's your last warning.
I'm trying, sir. I'm trying. It's about the MOU for the various government bargaining units. How's that?
I'm absolutely impressed.
Yes, okay. So I'm on topic. Thank you, Council.
You're welcome.
Yes, so we support all cuts of health care, a 19% increase, a 20% decrease in pay, furloughs for 3 days a week, and a $100 fine payable to the federal court.
No, that's Mitchell Englander.
Oh, okay, yes, that's correct. You're making a very good point, sir. So then we will put our faith in Paul Correct, and he will balance our budget. He will save us from the fiscal cliff, because Joe Biden's not going to give us the money. He's too old and too stupid. He's not as smart as Jose Huizar when it comes to finding money from China.
Again, completely off topic. Please cut off the speaker and move to the next one.
No. But we're having a good conversation about the budget. This is the important thing.
On budget committee, please cut him off and move to the next speaker. David, I think you're having technical difficulties. You sounded like Darth Vader. Go ahead, next speaker.
Good afternoon. Ruth Perry, President of the Retired Los Angeles City Employees Incorporated, again speaking on item number 8, Council File 20-1606. I'd like to reiterate that our organization is strongly opposed to any significant changes to the retiree health care benefits, and remind the council members that the retiree health benefit is exceptionally well funded at 85.6% currently, and does not need nor is making a significant cost savings aspect to change those benefits to the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
It appears that the queue is completely empty of public speakers.
Great, thank you. If
Goodbye.
if the CAO could make one presentation on the key provisions of all the items on this agenda.
Yes, sir, I will. Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Dana Brown from the City Administrative Officer's ERD section. So before you today are 7 items that are similarly situated and one that is slightly different. So items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8 represent amended MOUs. As you are aware, the COVID crisis has led to an enormous drop in budgeted revenue, requiring immediate attention and action to this year's budget as well as upcoming budget years. Any money-saving task of this magnitude requires a combined effort of the city and all of its partners, including our labor partners. For the past several months, under the instruction of the Executive Employee Relations Committee, the Employee Relations Division of the CAO's office has been negotiating with our labor partners to find additional cost-saving measures above and beyond things already agreed to and implemented, such as the separation incentive program and the 2 unpaid days in November and April of this fiscal year. After much negotiation, the final product is before you. These amended MOUs contain the following universal terms: an 18-month contract extension for all units, deferral of upcoming raises, such as there are no raises to be paid in the current fiscal year or in fiscal year 21-22, 2 additional unpaid days in the current fiscal year, no furloughs in the current fiscal year, no layoffs in the current fiscal year, a salary reopener in January of 2022, an increase in the maximum accumulation of overtime during the term of this MOU of the MOUs, and up to 40 hours of personal leave for bargaining unit members. These amendments will result in roughly $81.1 million in direct cost savings over this fiscal year and the next, and that includes savings from the raise deferrals as well as the 2 unpaid days. In some, but not all, of the MOUs, there are a couple of additional special adjustments that address compaction and inequity issues, and these are few and they vary throughout the bargaining units. Finally, item 6 is a report to defer the upcoming raises for non-represented employees. As you know, these are tied to EAA with regard to salaries, so this report amends the administrative code to provide the new effective dates for the salary adjustments. I am here with my staff. In the interest of time, I've just summed up those key elements, and I'm here with my staff to address any questions that you may have.
Well, I personally just want to thank you, certainly on behalf of the council, for leading these negotiations, and thank all our labor partners for their shared sacrifice and helping us get through this terrible shortfall, and all the good work, of course, that they did to help us get through the pandemic thus far. So we appreciate their share of this, and I'd ask for any comments or questions from my colleagues. Hearing none, I would just ask that we implement the following recommendations for items 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, and 8 to approve the CAO recommendations, and for item 6, approve the draft ordinance and approve the CAO recommendations. So if we could have a roll call vote on those items.
Yes, Councilmember Koretz.
Aye.
Councilmember Harris Dawson.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonnet.
Yes.
Those items are passed. Is there anything else before us on this agenda?
No, that clears the desk, Mr. Chair.
In that case, we will adjourn both the special meeting and the regular meeting, and we are adjourned. Thank you, colleagues.
Very good.
Thank you.